Yu-Gi-Oh cards looked better before.
If you share Grandpa's opinion, then let me ask you, what do you mean by before? With this game having over 25 years of existence, this before can mean many different things. So I made this guide to help everyone pinpoint their favorite card's appearance or layout through the dozen generations of cards, or series as we call them, that have been produced. And to make it as visual as possible, I've gathered around 200 cards from the whole game's history. And I will introduce them in their chronological order of release, showing the evolution brought by each series. As we go, I will also mention when the main rarities came out. And before we start, let me just mention the many timestamps that I've set. This will come in handy if you decide to come back to find information on a specific era, and or if you need to share visual material when trying to explain what the difference between series A and B is. And don't miss the recap sheet that I left at the end of the video for you guys. And with that out of the way, let's jump in the history of series and layout of Yu-Gi-Oh cards. Before anything, we need to define what series and layout mean for Yu-Gi-Oh cards. In simple words, let's say that the cards are designed by Konami following specific guidelines, which define how the elements on them need to be placed or laid out, and what the general look and feel should be. Included are the typography, the coloring, the shapes like frames or icons, the artwork position, the spacing between elements, the thickness of frames, the sharpness of borders, etc. And the configuration of all of them on the card is what makes the card layout. Now, those guidelines have evolved over time for several reasons, be it to make cards more convenient to use, especially for readability, or to welcome changes in the game such as the introduction of new mechanics, or even to clarify some elements of the cards. And to put it simply, every evolution of the layout is launched with a new series. And if we fast forward to 2025, at the start of Series 13, the cards look very different from the ancestors at the beginning of the TCG in 2002, let alone from those at the start of the OCG in 1999. Before the card game even started, there was only the manga, right? So I thought it'd be interesting to start this sequence by visualizing the purest form of card layout there is, the actual source, while thanking again Mr. Takahashi-sensei for his gift and hopes he rests in peace. So let's have a look at the card's layout in the manga first. Here is a scan taken from the chapter 117, where Yugi summons one of his signature card, the Mystical Elf, or Holy Elf in her original name. See how simple it is? The name, the artwork to represent the monster, plus the attack and defense points. And finally, the stars, which were in the pre-tribute summon era, an indicator for how rare or powerful a card was. Alright, with the manga layout now set in our mind as a reference, let's close this chapter and proceed to what we love.
Japanese cardboard.
In 1998, Bandai released the first version of the Yu-Gi-Oh card game, to go along with the first version of the anime, usually referred as Series 0 and never distributed outside of Japan. This first anime is definitely darker than Duel Monsters, the following version, which is the first one we got in the West. Here, the story is not centered around the card game, which is only one of the many hazardous, if not deadly, games introduced in the show. And Yugi's alter ego in this one is Wicked. As you can see, the cards were already more elaborate than their manga counterpart, with the notable addition of a text box on the bottom left-hand corner that tells players to apply one of the 13 only existing rules of the game. And for the monsters, there is a line of flavor text under their name. I personally never knew those cards, but I love their grotesque but simple art direction. It's dark and has this 90s edgy look that we retro players love, so I couldn't resist but get a couple for myself. on January 1999, after a run that did not even last a full year, but still saw the release of 3 waves of cards, Bandai ceased the production of Yu-Gi-Oh cards, leaving Konami with the exclusive right to publish cards. And you know what? Konami had not waited for this decision to start its card business. As soon as 1998, that is, when Bandai was still the main publisher of Yu-Gi-Oh cards, Konami was already doing business with the license. Unsurprisingly, it started with video games, as Konami at that time had been a leading company in the industry for over 2 decades already, and was still bringing big hits, like Metal Gear Solid, in that same year of 1998. So the first iteration of cards, or what I like to call Series 0, were obtainable by getting the first 2 Yu-Gi-Oh video games ever made. First came Yu-Gi-Oh! Monster Capsule Breed and Battle for the PlayStation 1 in July 1998, in which the player trains monsters before bringing them into a series of battles against Yugi, Mokuba, Kaiba, and a few other opponents. Leaving cards aside, this style of creature game was made very popular by the release of Pokémon that came out 2 years prior. Then, still in 1998, in the month of December, came also Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters for the Game Boy Color. This was the first video game to be played with Yu-Gi-Oh! cards. The player had to go through 5 stages, made of several opponents, and had to beat them multiple times to advance to the next level. The rules in place were kind of different from the real card game we know, which was still in the making. Each of those 2 games offered a selection of 10 cards, and 3 of them were included randomly in the game box. On top of that, some of them were distributed at the tournament for the Game Boy game in 1999. Here are 2 copies I managed to grab to show you. They are commonly called Monster Capsule in Japan and sell for a reasonable price considering their age, except for the Blue Eyes White Dragon, because of course collectors need to have this one as well in their collection. See the brand here? Those are indeed Konami cards. Now, if we have a look at one of them and compare it with its manga counterpart, it looks somewhat similar in terms of layout, with the addition of text at the bottom left-hand corner, retained from Bandai's design probably, but departing from it, the monsters' artwork were redrawn, looking even more different from the manga now, and their frame were shrunk to look like squares, while the monster stars, or the type, if a trap or a spell, are positioned on the top right-hand corner. Although this was marketed as a collectible card game, and therefore could never be played in any official capacity, without a doubt, this initial run allowed Konami to evaluate how big the market was for a more serious official card game, which was certainly already in the making. And to end with a fun fact, up to this day in 2025, there are still 7 cards from this Series 0 that haven't been released in the current Konami card game. We now finally enter the main topic of this video, the series of the Konami card game, starting from Series 1. For convenience, I will define the start of each series in terms of core sets, although in some cases it actually started with a side product. In the same line, I will refer to those core sets in the OCG as the starting date of each series, leaving aside some specificities of the TCG as it generally follows a couple of months after anyway. Having secured the rights to exploit the license beyond promotional cards, Konami's game designers went back to the drawing board. After what seems to have been a few weeks only, they came up with a brand new game, featuring many more rules than the mere 13 from Bandai's game, although admittedly, many aspects were still unclear at the beginning. The first generation of cards was composed of 7 core sets called volumes, and beside them were what we can call semi-core sets, the 7 boosters. Those were partly made of reprints from volumes, especially the first iterations, but also introduced new cards. Note that while the volumes were sold in display boxes like what we still have nowadays, the boosters were sold in vending machines, like the one you see on screen. So here we are. This is Series 1, or Shoki in Japanese. This is how the game looked at its beginning in 1999 with the launch of the first expansion, Volume 1. Compared with Series 0, the layout has been refined. The size is reduced from a standard size card to what we call a Japanese size. There is now a distinctive color for each type of card. Yellow for normal monsters, green for spell, pinky red for traps, etc. Monsters have more details, with an attribute like dark, light, and so on, but also a type, like spellcasters, beast, dragon, etc. The card name is still at the top, but is now framed, with a shadow on the right and bottom side. The monster level also got a visual overhaul. Although still represented by stars, those are now encapsulated and the rainbow-like colors were dropped in favor of a yellow and orange duo. In comparison, this uniform Dragon Ball aspect fits visually better with the rest, at least in terms of the color palette used. However, this change has weakened the readability. For example, in the previous system, if the first star was red, then the monster could immediately be recognized as a level 7. But now, when looking at a new monster, players often have to actually count the stars, one by one, to know the level, and this can be a bit cumbersome for higher level monsters. Finally, the text on the card is still at the bottom, but is now centered. It's not about copyrights and such anymore, but about the card itself, be it its effect or lore. And it is surrounded by a stylized frame looking as if made of wood. It is impossible to speak about Series 1 without mentioning the anime, created by TV Tokyo, as it used the same card layout made by Konami. This was part of a deal to make the show and merchandise complementary and therefore boost both viewership and card sales. See how it looks the same in the anime and in reality? In the West, to comply with US regulation that protects kids from advertising in disguise, the layout was changed to differ from the real card games sold in the stores. This led to the textless, big artwork picture that we know. And by we, I mean any country in the West, Italy, France, Germany, the UK, since we all inherited the US treatment. By the way, this is not to be confused with actual censorship of cards, which targets the name and artwork to remove in them any religious reference, threats of violence, or display of weapons and alcohol. This is a bit different. After 25 years, Series 1 remains the original and arguably the real look of Yu-Gi-Oh cards. This has been acknowledged at least twice by Konami, for the 20th anniversary and the reprint of Volume 1, and more recently for the 25th anniversary and the reprint of the Premium Pack 1 and the EX Starter Deck, plus the promotional Chaos Soldier. Volume 1, the first set of the game, launched with 4 rarities. Here are cards from this set that I've gathered to show you. Like in any other card games, at the baseline we can find the normals, or commons, in the TCG. Then comes the rares, with their silver names, which is the only element differentiating them from the normals. That's why in Japanese they are casually referred as jirea, meaning characters rare. The third rarity, the super rares, take it to another level by introducing a foiling technology to the artwork. The fourth and most premium rarity at the game launch, the ultra rares, are like supers, to which the card name had been upgraded to shiny gold. It should come as no surprise that the first card printed in this rarity is the signature card of Yugi, the Dark Magician. That's it for Volume 1, but there are still 3 more rarities that came out during the rest of the Series 1 generation. Starting with a 5th rarity, which is more variation in my opinion, in the form of the Ultra Secret Rares. Those were used mainly for promotional cards, with its first print being the famous Aquamador, given at the tournament for the Game Boy game Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters 2 Dark Duel Stories. Others would be distributed via magazines like the Shonen Jump or the official guide, from which this Flame Swordsman is coming. The 6th rarity historically introduced were the secrets, in the core set Volume 3. with the first card ever given this rarity being Gaia, the Dragon Champion. That is probably why it would stay at this rarity level in the release of LOB for the TCG. Secrets were named like that because when looking at the back of boxes or boosters, where the drop rates were detailed, there was no sign of them, as if their very existence wasn't confirmed but kept, you guessed it, as a secret. Finally, the seventh and last rarity to enter the dance in Series 1 are Ultra Parallel Rares. They exist as a premium version of Ultra Rares, and are of course harder to get. As you can see, they are indeed Ultras, but with a layer on top, made of holographic stripes, which run in parallel, thus the name. Their debut was in Volume 5 with 4 cards. So here you have it, the 7 rarities introduced with the first series of the game. Well, that's for the official story, because with Volume 3 and Reaper of the Cards came the grim existence of normal rares, also known as short prints in the TCG. As you can see with these examples taken from later sets, they look identical to other normals, but you have a much lower chance to pull one of them. This is arguably one of the most controversial topics of this card game, and I could make a whole video about them alone. So for now, just remember that they were introduced right from the first series, taking the slot of commons. Having released already 7 volumes and booster sets, plus some side products, while having also made substantial changes to the game rules, hello tribute summoning, plus having experienced difficult time, such as the chaos at the Tokyo Dome event, Konami thought it was time to soft reboot their game. That included giving their cards a refreshed look and start a new wave of core sets. On April 1st, 2000, Magic Ruler marked the start of Series 2. In Japanese it is referred to as Nikki. And by the way, this is the name given to the format that includes all Series 1 and Series 2. As I will do for all the following series, here is a visual comparison between the series being discussed and the previous one. As you can see, this new template brings a drastic change in the box's size at the bottom. The text box now occupies 2/3 of the space, whereas the monster's attack and defense box is confined to the 1/3 remaining portion. This was permitted by a shrinking of the stats indicator from 3 to a single kanji. Also, we can note that the box borders were made thinner, freeing very moderately some additional space. It's striking that the search for more text space is what already drove the first evolution in layout, like it would again several times in the future. As you can see here, the spells and traps now get a specific subtype icon to indicate when they are not of the normal kind. Another thing introduced that was painfully lacking in Series 1 is the card code on the right side, below the artwork. At its beginning, it was made of 2 letters for the set code and the card number in it. With this indicator, you were finally able to say that your pot of grid was coming from the structure deck of Yugi and not Joy. Finally, let's mention the Eye of Anubis, added on the bottom right hand corner to prevent counterfeiting. And in case you do find Series 1 cards with a hologram like here, it's only because they are not original prints from 1999 and 2000, but rather recent reprints from the 20th and 25th anniversaries, for example. Series 1 and 2 were only released in Japan as we saw, but the structure deck Kaiba included a card that shows what it could have looked like if Series 2 had received an English printing. Indeed, of the 3 copies of Blue Eyes White Dragon included in this deck, one was in English, alongside a Chinese copy and of course a Japanese one. This multilingual playset was a hint at Kaiba's stature
as a CEO of an international company who has gathered the few existing Blue Eyes copies from all around the world.
In terms of rarities, Series 2 saw the introduction of the fan favorite Ultimate Rares in the 4th set, Thousand Eyes Bible. with the first card to receive that treatment being the Thousand Eye Sacrifice, or Restrict in the TCG, which is the boss monster from the set and the iconic monster from Pegasus. This new embossed rarity didn't take the spot of another one, but rather was acting as a deluxe version of a card existing already in another rarity in the set. That's why you have in the same set Thousand Eye Sacrifice in Ultimate Rare, on top of the usual Ultra and Ultra Pearl versions. This first era of Yu-Gi-Oh!, exclusive to Japan, ended on March 21st, 2002, with the simultaneous release of the core set Pharaonic Guardian and the Pegasus Structure deck. As the game was set to launch internationally, Konami wanted a common template for all regions. This new iteration would need to have an even larger text box, since phonetic languages like English, German and French take typically more space than Japanese does. Looking at how small the text for Thousand Eyes Restrict already is in Japanese, it would simply not fit in English, let alone in German with its monster words, or French and its plethora of particles. This move to a fresh new layout, called World Unified Format, and indicated by a stamp on OCG boosters reading
World Standard,
was brought to all regions in the spring of 2002, and that look would stay relatively the same for the next 8 years, that is, until the end of Series 6. The third series appeared on March 8, 2002. Rings any bell? That is the release date of LOB in the West. Yes, that's right, for this time only, the series started in the TCG before the OCG, which was with the new ruler on May the 16th. So what exactly does this new worldwide format bring? For starters, the artwork is now shorter and has the dimensions of a square. The vertical symmetry is also lost, with the space above and below the artwork not being equal anymore. As mentioned, the text box is now taller, and for monsters specifically, the attack and defense is placed on the bottom of this text box. Note that the OCG has adopted also the English abbreviations of attack and defense. The card code was changed as well. Although still made of 2 sections, it now has 3 characters for the set prefix, and then another 3 digits for the card position in the set. As opposed to the TCG that adopted an abbreviation of the extension name, like LOB for Legend of Blue Eyes White Dragon, in the OCG, for the core sets of this third series, Konami blatantly put the series number on the card, as can be seen here, with a 3 at the start. Here you have a card from each of those OCG core sets, starting with 301 and the new ruler, up until 309 and Pharaoh's Inheritance. It's at the time of Series 3 that Magic cards were renamed Spell cards, to avoid a legal conflict with Magic the Gathering. In the OCG, up until Invader of Darkness, which is 307, the cards were called Magic. You can see it in the filigrana above the kanjis. In the TCG, the Magic appellation was in place until Pharaonic Guardian, or PGD. Then, in the following sets, the Sanctuary in the Sky 308 for the OCG and Magician's Force in the TCG, this was changed respectfully to Maho, which is the actual Japanese word for magic, and Spell in the TCG. Do you know this rarity? It's called normal parallels. Technically speaking, they are simply commons upon which the parallel finish, found on Ultras until then, was added. In the TCG, this rarity was used only for the promo cards that were included with the Elemental Heroes toys from Mattel. In the OCG, however, it has been printed all the way back from Series 3, and in Japan, it is strongly associated with side products and prizes. Indeed, in November 2002, Starting with this Mahavailo, Konami introduced normal parallels for the PC series, which stands for Promo Card. Each month of the tournament season, a new card would be granted to the winners. Now, moving on the conversation to the TCG, we can mention a few things. First, at the time of launch, not only had the TCG the same rarities that Volume 1 did, that is, normals, rares, supers, ultras, but the secrets were also already added. They were brought to the TCG right from the start with Gaia, the Dragon Champion, in LOB. But their foiling would be different, or rather, another type of foiling was created for the secret rarity used in the core sets. See, here is an example of two Jinzos from core sets, one from the OCG and one from the TCG. Both are called secrets in their respective region. However, this OCG foiling would still be used in a TCG but in much rarer instances, mainly for video game promos, and it would be called prismatic secret rares, to be differentiated from the main secrets. As we saw, Series 3 brought substantial changes to the layout, and, spoiler alert, the three following series, the 4, 5 and 6, would add only minor updates to the solid foundations. Series 4 covers the end of the TM era and a third of the GX era. It is at this time, in spring 2004, that Konami aligned the extensions around the world, with the TCG having finally caught up with the OCG. In this fourth series, the layout is kept visually unchanged from Series 3. Only the card code is touched, with two modifications. First, Konami chose to include the extension name in the card code, also for the OCG, like what had been done for the TCG release. This means that the first extension, Soul of the Duelist, was not coded 401 as a follow-up to 309, but rather SOD for Soul of the Duelist. Second, because the TCG had caught up with the OCG, the sets would now have a worldwide release, with only a few weeks of delay between Japan and the West, continuing up to this day. In this context, it seemed logic and convenient to add a language code to differentiate card prints from the same expansion. Thanks to this new element, without looking at the back, we can now tell apart a TCG English card from an OCG Asian English one. If you like the Dark Paladin like I do, you know that this card never got the ultimate treatment that it deserved. And that's because Series 3 had launched in the TCG without this rarity. Probably for technical reasons. Anyway, players in the West had to wait for Series 4 and the release of Soul of the Duelist to finally see this rarity being introduced. The second rarity introduced in the TCG under Series 4 are the Ultra Parallels, with the second wave of Hobby Leagues. The foil even evolved with time, as you can see here, a difference between the green gadget from earlier version and the two others which come from a later wave. Series 5 started in May 2006 with Power of the Duelist, and so 8 core sets, including the immensely powerful Phantom Darkness and Light of Destruction, concluding the GX series. Series 5 saw only a minor change, which was in the card code, moving from 3 to 4 characters. And at the time of making this video, at the start of Series 13, this is still the case. This change can easily be observed by taking twice a card from the same set, but picking them from boosters printed at different times and therefore under different series. For example, you have here on the left a mystical elf from the initial print of Beginner's Edition before Series 5, while on the right you have it from the same set, reprinted in 2011, therefore post Series 5. Leaving aside other changes that we'll see in later series, you can notice that the BE1 of Beginner's Edition has turned into a BE01. Starting with the 5th set Tactical Evolution and its card Rainbow Dragon, there will now be in each set an additional premium rarity card, in the form of a ghost rare. Most of the time, the single card receiving this treatment would be the monster featured on the front of the booster. Another rarity that made its debut during Series 5 were the gold rares, introduced with the Gold Series box in 2008 in the TCG, before coming into the OCG a year after in 2009. Finally, I'd like to mention a rarity that was introduced very early in the game, a couple of months after the start of Series 1 actually. Remember the Aquamador from the tournament I mentioned before? Well, in 2006, Konami decided to finally bring the ultra secret rarity to the TCG as well, via the GX limited edition. But this would concern a single card ever. It is the good old White Heart who received this privilege. See the name? It boasts the shiny silver look of secrets, right? But its artwork is simply foiled, like for regular ultras. This new series accompanied the start of the 5Ds arc and its introduction of Synchro Monsters, the main edition of this series. To accommodate for this debut of a new card type, a small change was necessary to be made on cards from the Fusion deck, which is now called the Extra deck. So here is a look at Series 6 and its predecessor. As you see, nothing is worth mentioning, except for the addition of the Synchro Monster in the Extra deck, that is. Well, there was actually a little something new, which was more relevant for the OCG. Let's see. Here aligned are Fusion Monsters from Series 3 to 6. If we observe the layout of the two Ultimate Blue Eyes from Series 3 and 6, except for the difference in the card code structure that we mentioned before, and obviously the language, they look the same. Now let's have a look at the 5-head dragon, and more precisely at its name. The small white characters above, the superscript, conveniently tells you how to read it. In this case, 5-God Dragon. In Japanese, those helping characters are called furigana, and the Korean language uses them too, to help with pronunciation and translation. Like for this Blackwing monster, whose archetype is actually named Black Feather, originally in the OCG, thus the BF. See how those small characters are already hard to read in their white color font? So, on the white background of Synchro Monsters, that would have been simply invisible. Therefore, those small characters were changed to black with Series 6. Thank you, Konami, for all you've done to preserve the player's vision. During the 5Ds era, in 2010, Konami launched the dual terminals in Japan and North America, a network of arcade game systems that could be used to duel in different modes, using real cards. The cabinets had a vending mode as well, and would distribute single cards in a new exclusive rarity, commonly referred as DT, close to normal parallel, but with dots instead of lines. This rarity even received an update of its foil, before Konami decided to discontinue this line of game product, around 2012, after nonetheless 14 consecutive versions that had even reached the Zexal arc at the end. As we've seen, up until the end of Series 6, and save for complexifications of the card code and the introduction of Synchro Monsters, there were barely any changes made to the Series 3 card look. This makes this general type of layout one that lasted very long, roughly from 2002 to 2010, and is a source of nostalgia for the TCG players. Actually, these 4 series are what is commonly referred as small box or old TCG layout by people who don't want to bother with specificities, like we're doing in this video. By 2010, the Yu-Gi-Oh card game had seriously exhausted the traction it got from the anime. In spite of its undeniable qualities, 5Ds never reached the popularity of the first series. or even the already weaker GX for that matter. Acknowledging that his card game would pretty much have to stand on its own from that moment onwards, Konami was convinced he had to modernize it to keep it as a top-tier competitive game. The path chosen by the game designers was to push forward with combo-oriented decks, and as a consequence, the lengthening and complexification of cards effects would only continue. And to facilitate this type of gameplay, the layout had to be modernized. Starting in 2010 with Duelist Revolution, Series 7 saw both the end of the 5Ds era with its first 4 sets until Extreme Victory and the beginning of the Zexal arc, with 4 sets going from Generation Force up until Galactic Overlord, released in the winter of 2012. In comparison to the previous series, there are 2 modifications worth mentioning, both touching on the text box. First, to support the lengthening of effects, the text box has been made taller and wider, allowing more text to fit with it. And second, to improve the readability of this box, the contrast has been increased, via a whitening of the background. As it witnessed the introduction of the Zexal arc, Series 7 is of course associated with X's monsters. Their debut was with Generation Force, and as you know, they feature a new color, black. Stars are moved to the left, since they do not refer to levels but to ranks, and for obvious reasons, the text outside the effect box, which is usually black, is now printed in white. The same expansion, Generation Force, introduced in the TCG the problem-solving card text, or PSCT. In both the OCG and the TCG, the first set of this 7th series, Duelist Revolution, brought changes to the aspect of ultimate rares. Here are examples of cards from before and after, with Effect Veiler being taken straight from the set Duelist Revolution that we just mentioned. Now they sport some foil on the outer border too. I would like to mention the noticeable change in the North American secret pattern that was brought with Series 7, making them quite different from their EU counterpart at that time. With Duelist Revolution, the stripes on the holofoil of North American prints got thinner, and this discrepancy lasted until Primal Origin at the end of Series 8. With its first set, Return of the Duelist, going on sale in spring 2012, Series 8 continues the Zexal arc, and closes it after another 8 core sets, with Primal Origin in February 2014 being the last one. With Series 8, Konami wanted to make a better use of the available space left in the card, pushing it to the limit in the upper part. Let's see. It started with a reasonable expansion of the artwork by adding on the side columns, but also on the space above. And as a consequence, the stars now look cramped between the name and the artwork boxes. And if we have a look at a trap card, we realize that the same can be said for the subtype icons and labels. Look here, the superscript, helping with the reading, ends up partly inside the blurry area of the card box. Moving on to the lower part, we can also see a manifest increase in the font size. Instead of leaving unused blank space after a relatively short effect, Konami decided that they might as well write it in a bigger size, showing little concerns for the resulting visual disharmony between cards with those different font sizes. I think this change makes it clear that most, if not all the evolutions of the layout prioritize the ergonomics over the aesthetic. At the Yu-Gi-Oh! World Championships that take place every year since 2003, a couple of unique cards are awarded to the winners. These cards are called match winners since their effect, inspired by the one of Victory Dragon, typically says, if this card reduces the opponent's LP to 0 by direct attack, you win the match, and are accompanied by the mention, cannot be used in a duel. The prize cards created for the Worlds of 2012 were the legendary Dragon of White and the legendary Magician of Dark, based of course on the iconic monsters of Yugi and Kaiba. Because Konami didn't want to let the fans down, they decided to bring them to the general OCG public by making them the chase card of the Extra Pack Swords of Night in May 2013. For this reprint, the two monsters were upgraded to a new rarity, the Extra Secret Rare. As you can see, the foil extends beyond the artwork and now covers most of the card, with a secret pattern that doesn't look like the typical squarish one of the OCG, but rather is similar to the diagonal pattern of TCG Secrets. 1 year after the introduction in the OCG, the extra secret rares were brought to the TCG with the consecutive Megatins of 2014 and 2015. But for the West, their name was changed. To what already, Roxanne?
Oh, the Platinum Secrets! Yeah, these are the Platinum Secret Rares. Ooh.
Yeah, that's right, and with only 2 extra secrets included as promos for those 2 years, in the TCG there were only 4 of them for the longest time. 8 years actually. Until the Rarity collection came out in 2022 to celebrate the 25th anniversary. In their new version, the foil was removed from the background and the side border of the card, making them overall less shiny, probably to leave the top glittering spot to the QCRs. Finally, let's mention the Mosaic and Star Foil rarities that came out during Series 8, in side products like Battle Packs. These rarities featured a star or flakes type holographic pattern printed on the surface of the card, not too far from the dual terminal rarity actually. From Series 4 up until Series 8, each series was made of 8 core sets, and with the exception of Series 6, that welcomed Synchro Monsters, the switch to the next series was not related to the anime. It was happening with the release of a set right in the middle of an anime arc, like Generation Force welcoming the Zexal period, although being already the 5th set of Series 7 out of 8. However, this would change with Series 9, launching side by side with the new anime season, Yu-Gi-Oh! RP, and from that moment onwards, a new anime would mean a new series. And this, even if the anime in question is a spin-off, like Yu-Gi-Oh! 7s and Go Rush Wear. As a consequence, Series 9 includes 4 more sets than its predecessor, with a grand total of 12 now, to fit the duration of the anime's broadcast. About the novelties of Series 9, it is with its first set, Duelist Alliance, released in spring 2014, that the infamous pendulum mechanic got introduced, turning off many players at that time. This monstrosity, born from mixing a spell and a monster, with some red and blue arrows on the side, can be loaded with lots of text. To make some room for the additional text box, the card code has been ejected to the bottom left-hand corner. Beyond pendulum cards, Series 9 brought other changes to the layout. It's become a routine by now, but the effect text box is widened again. The card name box is slightly shorter in height by around a millimeter, but distinctively wider. This elevation of the name box permits some padding around the stars or the subcard type in the case of spells and traps, so they don't touch the boxes above and below anymore. Although as you see, it still fits pretty tightly in there. Finally, it is with Series 9 that the mention of the edition is placed right next to the passcode on the bottom left-hand corner. In a TCG, Dimension of Chaos, released in November 2015, was the last core set to include Ghost and Ultimate Rares. Regarding Ghost, they would be permanently discontinued from the existing product lines, to only reappear in specific side products 5 years later, first in 2020 in the legendary duelist Rage of Ra, and then in 2021 and 2022 in the Ghost from the Past Volume 1 and 2 sets. As for the Ultimate Rares, although they were also discontinued from core sets, they would receive a better fate as they would be reintegrated into another product line. The pack distributed at official tournament stores, aka the OTS packs. As we've seen, the card layout changed heavily in the span of the Series 7, 8 and 9, in an effort by Konami to bring its game to the expected modern standards. At the end of this era, the card pretty much looked like what we have nowadays. I mean, most players wouldn't see the difference between a Series 9 from 2016 and a Series 12 card from 2025, right? Let's kick off the modern era with Series 10, and as previously mentioned, a new anime meant a new card series. So as expected, to accompany the beginning of the 6th anime, Yu-Gi-Oh! Reigns, the next series, the 10th, came along. The first set of this series, Code of the Duelist, out in spring 2017, brought the Link monsters into the game. Their layout is unique, with its blue background and 2 specific additions, the Link arrows around the artwork and the Link rating on the bottom right hand corner. Another specificity of Link monsters is the card number that has been moved a little to the left to make some room for the bottom right hand Link arrow. Now broadening the conversation to every types of cards, you can maybe see some changes from Series 9. These are: the border of the upper box containing the card name and attribute is sharpened. The blur that has always been there has been significantly reduced. To prevent counterfeiting, the Eye of Anubis hologram was complexified. Now, on top of the Yugi words and the Uja Eye, small stars are also visible. Regarding normal monsters, a label normal is added after the type of monster to specifically differentiate them from effect monsters. As you can see here, it's a Speed Duel card, which was launched at the start of Series 10, that is on November 2018. Except for the 2 inscriptions, one below the artwork and one Speed hologram embossed on the text for newer cards, they are the same as regular cards. In the TCG, at the time of Series 10, a deluxe rarity was introduced for the core sets only, the Starlight Rares. Just like Ultimate Rares back in the days, Starlights were an upgraded version of a card that also existed in another base rarity. They were initially 4 per expansion, corresponding each to one of the rarities that were still included at that time. For example, in their introductory set, Rising Rampage, that came out in July 2019, this Appaloosa, which was already a secret rare at its base rarity, was also made available as a Starlight. This is to say how prestigious this rarity was, which is only confirmed by their very low drop rate, making them by far the most difficult to get. Starting with Eternity Code, the sets also included a famous legacy card as an extra Starlight, like Effect Veiler, Stardust Dragon, Black Rose Dragon, and so on. Starlight Rares were discontinued after the set Power of the Element in the summer of 2022, to make a comeback with Series 13 in 2025. On the OCG side of things, Starlight Rares were called Prismatic Secret Rares, when they got introduced with Rise of the Duelist in Series 11. That's later than the TCG, but there is a good reason for that, which we'll talk about later when touching on quarter century rares. To finish, let's just mention that it is at the time of Series 10 that the foil effect was added on the attribute and also on the pictogram indicating the subtype like continuous trap, quick spell, equipment, and such. The latest series to date, the 11th, 12th, and 13th, came out still synchronized with the start of a new anime. And this was true even at the time of Yu-Gi-Oh! 7 in 2020 and Yu-Gi-Oh! Go Rush in 2022, which were departing from the main card game in favor of the alternative Rush Duel. But in 2025, with the launch of the new anime Yu-Gi-Oh! Card game Chronicles, the series is back at supporting the main official card game. Heads up here, the layout for the series 11, 12, and 13 is identical. That's why I'll be combining them. As you can see, the cards of those last series still look the same as series 10, except for one element. The copyright section at the bottom right hand corner has been changed, removing the name of Kazuki Takahashi to leave only his company, Studio Dice. The copyright record date was also updated from 1996 to 2020, making cards from series after 10th even more recognizable. In the Japanese OCG, TV Tokyo and Konami were added, while in the TCG, on top of those two companies, Shueisha, the firm behind the weekly Shonen Jump, which had been there in Japanese since series 1 actually, is also finally added. So yeah, that copyright thing is pretty much the only change since series 10. Although they had existed for already a long time in the OCG, with their launch in the Zexal collection pack, with some Xyz monsters getting this new special treatment, the TCG finally saw the arrival of Collector's Rare with the set Toon Chaos. This premium rarity is limited to certain side sets, in which it is supposed to be the most chased after rarity, like Ultimate Rares in OTS packs or Starlight Rares for core sets. Their look has evolved a lot since its beginning, with a foil much more visible in later iterations, like in the Rarity collection in which they were made more easily accessible. Back in 2018, to celebrate the 20 years of the license, Konami released exclusively in the OCG a special rarity called the 20th Anniversary Secret Rare. This started with Cybernetic Horizon and lasted up until Eternity Code at the end of Series 10, before getting replaced in Rise of the Duelist at the start of Series 11 by what Konami calls Prismatic Secret Rares. Those were the OCG equivalent of the Starlight Rares, which in the West we had been having since a few sets already. Do you remember when I told you Starlight Rares would come later in the OCG? Well, in reality they had been there already for some time, but in this form of 20th anniversary, just waiting to evolve. A couple of years later, in 2023, to celebrate the 25th anniversary of the license, Konami decided to bring back this anniversary rarity. But this time around, the TCG would get it as well. And since we are talking about the 25 years of existence, they were gracefully named Quarter Century Secret Rares, and are commonly referred as QCRs. In terms of visual aspect, QCRs are indeed the descendant of the 20th anniversary and Starlight Rares, with the year stamp making a return, plus a change of color in the card's name from silver to gold. As a consequence of this lineage, following their launch in side products, QCR joined the core sets, as a replacement for Prismatic Secret Rares in the OCG and for Starlight Rares in the TCG. Since they remained from its first expansion Duelist Nexus up until the last one, Alliance Insight, we can say that QCRs are the symbol of Series 12, from which the boosters can be easily recognized from others thanks to their 25th anniversary stamp. In the end, I can't help but notice that this anniversary rarity lasted much longer than the expectable one-year celebration, which ended with the art collection in the OCG and the Stampede side set in the TCG, leaving the stage for Starlight Rares to make a comeback in Series 13. And that's probably until the 30th anniversary hit the market in a couple of years. Right, Konami? I would like to end these Rarities updates by mentioning Ultimate Rares one last time, as it is the favorite rarity of most players and collectors. With Series 11, in the OCG their aspect was completely changed, as you can see here. The recognizable dark golden texture has been removed from the frame and background of the card, supposedly to improve the visibility of the artwork, while a glossy finish is now applied everywhere, except for the foreground of the artwork that remains in relief. And by the way, did you know that relief is the name of Ultimate Rares in Japan? This new technology for Ultimate Rares was brought to the TCG2 via the Rarities collection. However, as of early 2025, Konami hasn't confirmed any plan yet to make them the regular LTs in the TCG as well. At the time of making this video, in 2025, if we leave the copyright update aside, we can say that the card layout hasn't changed for the past 7 years. And with Series 13 just starting, this will extend presumably to at least 9 years. Now that we've been through all the existing series up to the present day, there is a little extra thing that goes beyond the card's layout but still related to series that I wanted to mention. It has to do with the pack design and more precisely with their color. Since the introduction of Series 2 in 2000, the packs visual follow a certain cycle, with a repetition of the main colors used. It goes like that. The first pack is green, and since Series 4, it consistently includes the word Duelist. Then, the second booster in line is yellow, followed by red, orange, blue, purple, black, and white. Also, since the Series 9, 10, and 11 were longer, with 4 more sets, some colors were reused, but with a darker tone. And as a side note, you can see that the boosters for Rush Duel follow their own color cycle. And voila! Here are all the main boosters released up until the start of Series 13 in a rainbow-like fashion. As we've seen together, the Yu-Gi-Oh! Cards layout has evolved a lot during the more than 25 years of the license life, with the main driver being, arguably, a better ergonomy for the players. In my opinion, I think that the cards lost their identity in the process though. They now look a bit cold. And almost generic, just like today's artwork by the way. In comparison, when you look at a card from the early 2000s, their edge softness and the lack of good contrast, the faded colors used, or the amount of empty space for example, gave them this recognizable cool aspect. They were definitely imperfect, but so much more charming. And here's my hot take. Instead of taking half measures by adapting the card's layout through multiple surgeries to keep up with time, with the consequence of cards losing their luster, I wish Konami had taken the bold move right from Series 7 to completely refresh the layout with something like Rush Duel. I find them both pleasing to look at, with their vivid color and stylized elements, while also meeting today's expectations in terms of ergonomy, by putting forwards the information needed in a more sensible way. The attack and defense is not hidden in a corner anymore, and no need to count the actual star symbols to know the level of a monster. Those are obvious improvements that the main OCG TCG game could have benefited from since already a decade ago, while leaving the legacy layouts frozen in times, only to be cherished by us, the retro players and collectors. To wrap up this video, I've laid down the cards presented for each series introduced, so you can have a visual overview of the card's evolution over the 25 plus years of the game's existence. And to go back to the initial statement,
Yu-Gi-Oh! Cards looked better before.
Whether you share this opinion or not, you should now be able to rephrase this into something more accurate in regards to the game's historic timeline, like specifying the set, which was the cutoff, but also in terms of actual series. By looking at this panorama, I'm sure you can tell when the cards look the best for you. Personally, my heart goes to Series 2 for its original anime look, while bringing convenient improvements upon Series 1. But what about you guys? Tell me which is your favorite and why in the comments. I'm curious. And with that, we've come to the end of this video. I hope you learned something today or at least had a good time watching it. If that's the case, I would be grateful if you could drop a like to support me after the 100 hours spent making this one. Alright, love you guys, stay healthy, play some Yu-Gi, and see you soon on the channel for more retro Yu-Gi-Oh stuff. Ja, mata na Yu-Gi boys.